knees. No care for the weaker. Sharp elbows, sharp knees. They were the way forward. But a woman, not on my terms. Thank you very much indeed. I'm one of the oldest people, I think, ever to have stood on this platform. Bang go the lights.
I know.
Amazing.
So good. My king, my liege.
Oh, now.
Yes, Glenda Jackson. So first of all, let me pay tribute, because I did come to see King Lear on Tuesday, and I was absolutely, staggered by the sheer range of your humanity and spirit, and it's an incredible performance.
Well, thank you very much. It's an incredible play.
Well, it's an incredible play, but I couldn't help but think, it's 3.5 hours. I mean, gently, but you are 82. How
rapidly approaching 83.
Yeah. I mean, why did you
do that?
How did you, remember all those lines, keep the stamina up, do it night after night? I mean, it's amazing.
But first of all, it's an enormous privilege to be allowed to appear in a play like King Lear. He is probably the most contemporary playwright around still. And there is an energy in that play which, if you manage to dig into it, it takes you forward like an express train. I mean, it is an amazing piece of work.
Well, it's a thrilling performance.
Well, thank you.
Watching it, of course, it has a very the set. This new production has this sort of very gold, sort of glitzy set, yeah. And I couldn't help but think, we have a very old president and a conspiratorial, conniving family. And it did make me wonder a little bit if this is just a perfect moment for Lear in Trump's America.
Well, it's a perfect moment. The tropes in the play that are absolutely alive now are quite astonishing. I mean, the millennials, for example, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the grudge there is, our parents are going to die and not going to leave us any money that we can enjoy spending. And that's in the play. There is so much in there that is still contemporary, because he is the most contemporary of dramatists.
Of course, it's an incredibly interesting, always has been, exploration of age. You
see, that's one of the things I found most interesting when I was asked to do it. As a member of Parliament, one of your duties, in a sense, is you visit old people's homes, day centres, things of that nature. And one of the things that I found most fascinating over those years was that as we grow older, those absolute boundaries of gender definition begin to fray. They begin to crack a little bit. They begin to get smoky. You see men doing things that 10 years ago they wouldn't have thought even vaguely was possible for them to do. The same for women. And that is very much, I think, a part of what is in Lear as well.
Yeah, that his whole personality begins to shift in different ways.
Completely.
Do you feel that age kind of hones a person's temperament or curdles it? I mean, do you think that, one gets better as one gets older or not?
The two things that have become clear to me as the older I get is that the inside me seems to be stuck at about age 15. It's the envelope that carries that me that suddenly becomes inordinately disobedient. It doesn't do what you tell it to do. That I've learned to my cost. And the other thing is how little I know. Just how ignorant I am. And that is very salutary. I don't know whether I'll be able to learn what I don't know, but I'm going to try.
How different are you now to how you were, 30 or 40 years? What's been your own aging journey?
It's very difficult to separate yourself out from the environment in which you were living at that time. It was such a completely different world. Even less than 30 years ago, I remember when I was first elected to Parliament, somebody said to me, "How are you going to manage living in this on working in this men's club. And I was at that time 50 odd, and I said, well, that's been my experience all my life. And it was. But over those intervening years between then and now, we've seen more women coming into, well, obviously professions that were denied to them before, but also real authoritative positions. I think when I would go back to the 30 years, I think I really was desperate to work. And one of the most salutary things about deciding you're going to be an actress, and I've never got a job from an audition in my life, but you would go for auditions. And I would spend a lot of time making myself look as good as I possibly could, and you'd walk into a room and there'd be people sitting behind a table, and they'd look up and they'd say to you, oh, thank you, darling, but we're looking for a blonde. Or, oh, thanks, sweetie, but really we need someone a bit taller. So you were totally rejected within about 30 seconds. But of course, it wasn't you that was totally rejected, but that's a very hard lesson to learn.
Very difficult.
But there is a value in learning that.
Yeah, it certainly toughens you up. Where do you think the egos are bigger, in the acting world or in the political world?
Oh, my God.
I touched
I have seen people walking down the corridors of Parliament, the House of Commons, with egos that would not be tolerated for 30 seconds in a professional theatre. I mean, unbelievable. And, you know, just bizarre.
Yeah.
Utterly bizarre.
And what about the current Brexit slow-moving car crash? I mean, having just got out of Parliament, you know, what are you looking at Parliament and thinking, what?
I can't believe I'm seeing what I'm seeing. I know those faces, some of those people I know quite well. They seem to have reverted from being adults, responsible, hopefully adults, to overindulge spoiled babies. I just don't get what is going on. They are crazy. I mean, it is utterly ridiculous. Whether you agreed with the result of the referendum, whether you voted to remain or whether you voted to leave, the country decided what it wanted. And it is Parliament's responsibility to deliver that democratic decision. I know Churchill said democracy is the least worst of all the options, but nonetheless, that's what our country is based on. And to see this vacillation, this overindulgence of their egos, is to me just shows shaming. And I think the way Theresa May has been treated is utterly appalling. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely disgraceful. I mean, there she is, slogging away, bless her, back and forward to Europe, to a Parliament that seems deliberately intent on savaging her and her ideas, while having none of their own to put in her place. I just think it's scandalous. Scandalous.
Well, I only hope that it doesn't make you run for Parliament again. Because,
no
because we want to keep you in the theatre. So you've always felt that there weren't really enough meaty roles for women,
Oh, no.
and although you've certainly defined many of them, is that why you're playing Lear, frankly? Because it's one of the best parts.
Exactly how it came. Well,
you're playing a man.
I mean, it came about because a great friend of mine and a brilliant Spanish actress, Nuria Esper, did it. And I went over to see it in Barcelona. She was wonderful. It was a great production. And she said to me, why don't you do it? I said, don't be ridiculous. They'd never let me do this in England. What are you talking about? Anyway, the old Vic wanted me to do something, and they said, okay, fine. And we did it. And it was, you know, fingers crossed, thank you, God, it was a success. But what I find utterly bemusing, and have for the whole of my theatrical career, is why contemporary dramatists don't find women interesting. Why are we rarely, if ever, the driving, central, dramatic engine? And we're not. And I just don't get it. I mean, we're by no means equal, don't get me wrong, I mean as a gender in the world as a whole. But there have been major changes in women's lives. Women's opinions, points of view, perspectives have not as big a array as I would like to see, but nonetheless, we are occasionally listened to. Dramatists don't find any of that interesting, and that really bemuses me.
Well, one of your most memorable roles, of course, was as Queen Elizabeth I in
right,
the BBC series. Do you see anything essentially different in the way women wield power? I mean, here you are, you're playing Lear, who is a man. You've played Elizabeth, obviously, who is another massive power figure. Do you think there's anything different in the way they respond?
The essential difference that I've found, certainly in politics, is that women can dislike each other, not have a friendly word to say about each other, but you sit around the table and we're all gathered there to tackle a particular problem. We can do it. I mean, women can actually approach problems in a way that is comprehensive, cooperative, and the problem can be settled. That has been my experience very strongly. I remember one committee I was on, early days. There are more women MPs now in Parliament than there were in my day, my first days. And there were 3 women on this committee. The 9 others were all men. And one of my colleagues put forward this idea, and the chair said, "Oh yes, thanks very much," moved on. One of the men, 10 minutes later, said exactly, virtually the same thing that she'd said. And the chair said, "Oh, that's a marvellous idea."
Well,
and
all had that
everybody around
experience.
the table said, "Oh, that's a marvellous idea." And my other colleague said, "Excuse me, she said that 10 minutes ago. Why was it good? Why is it good now? Why wasn't it good 10 minutes ago?" And the really interesting thing was, the ice drifted around all those male shoulders and they glared at those 3 women and thought, "Uh-oh, we know what you're up to." I mean, you know, it's just crazy, isn't it?
It really, really is. You said earlier that the differences between the sexes sort of fade with age.
I think so.
Which is
I
so
think
interesting.
they begin to fracture.
Do you think that jettisoning sexuality sort of frees women and allows them to realize their potential? Is the losing of sexuality a power engine, and that women, you know, who've passed into that sort of over their 50s and 60s?
I don't think it's something that you can pick up and put down quite like that, is it? Because I was talking about, you know, the inner me and the envelope that carries me around. There are things that happen to us over which we have absolutely no control. They're called hormones, I think, aren't they? So, but I think the thing that I found most marked, but I think that's possibly because the viewing panel, if you like, is absolutely enormous, and it may always have been like this, that public opinion on a truly personal level is something that is affecting people very strongly, whether they know that individual or not. And I think that has an effect. I mean, the need to meet other people's opinions of what is good, bad, indifferent, exciting, boring, they're in your face all the time now, aren't they? Because it's social media, and I'm sure that has some kind of effect on well, not just women, but you know, both genders.
Mm-hmm. American women spend an awful lot of trying to look younger, right? I mean, we have to say, I mean, plastic surgery, etc., something that you've always completely repudiated. I mean, do you think that, how have you confronted that yourself as an actress?
Well, I'm afraid of needles and knives. I don't want to go through all that. And I mean, in the theatrical profession, you have, you know, experts who can do things to you that don't hurt, that do kind of change the way you look. But I'm very, I always wanted, in a sense, to be old, because I wanted to demand somebody stand up and give me a seat on the bus. And now that people stand up in the tube and offer me a seat, I'm really quite shocked. I always take it, but, you know, I think, really, do I look that old? But there you go, you do. But there's something about defining the capacity of age, be it either very young, middle-aged, very old, which I strongly argue with. I never understood, mind you, we've increased our pension age in my country now, why you were deemed to be ineffective when you hit the age of 65 as a woman, you know, or at a certain age your brain had lost its capacity. And so I'm very iffy about age, I think.
Yeah. Well, you've had so many lives. I mean, the fire of performance just seems to burn in you still so strongly. To such an extent, I really can't quite understand or digest how you could have just turned your back on acting for, what, 23 years to go into politics?
Anything I could have done that was legal, that would have got Margaret Thatcher and her governments out of power, I was prepared to do. Anything, anything. I could not believe what was happening to my country under that woman. And we are still reaping the whirlwind in many ways. I didn't expect to be selected by the constituency party that approached me. I didn't expect to win the election, but we did, and big disappointment, Labour didn't win 92, but we did in 97. And so it was possible to begin to make some kind of changes in the kind of country that she was attempting to create.
You know, what I think people don't realise in that tirade that you saw that Glenda did in the House of Commons, which was so incredible, that actually was in the House of Commons as there was a tribute to Margaret Thatcher when she died, and Glenda got up and did that incredible tirade. How did that go over?
Well, initially, of course, I mean, the Conservative side were barracking me, but what I said was true. I mean, that was the country that I had lived in. My constituency had suffered from her policies. You know, schools where teachers, parents, kids even, spent most of their spare time and some of their working time trying to raise money to buy basic fundamentals like books and paper and pencils. There wasn't a single computer in any of the state schools in my constituency in 92. Now, you walk through the doors and you're bowled over by whiteboards and things like that, which is terrific. The NHS was being absolutely driven crazy, it seemed to me, by the structures. Local authorities were having their powers taken away. And there she was, you know, as though she was doing us all a big favour. This was a woman who said, "What did the suffragettes ever do for me?" I beg your pardon? Come on, you know. So,
well, you grew up, of course, in a working-class family in Cheshire,
did.
and your dad was a bricklayer, your mum cleaned houses.
Yeah.
You're the oldest of 4 sisters. I mean, what did you learn from that scrappy childhood?
One of the greatest gifts of my life has been a strong work ethic, because I grew up in that socio-economic group where if you didn't work, you didn't eat. And I'm so grateful for that work ethic. And I'm also very grateful. I accused my mother once of giving me an overdeveloped sense of responsibility too soon, because, of course, I had to go. My 3 sisters had to go wherever I went, whatever hour, day or night, which I resented deeply. But nonetheless, I think that, too, is something that I value very much, because it is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we were raised, well, I suppose we weren't raised in exactly the same way, because I think the responsibility of the first child most certainly is diminished by the 4th one came along. I mean, my younger sister could get away with murder. My sister and I, you know, we came from a very small place, and if either of us had bunked off school, my mother would have known that in 30 seconds. I mean, somebody knocking on our door telling her that her children were in the street, not at school. But that was the varieties that there can be in families, even though you're raised in exactly the same way with the same kind of blood structures, I suppose, is absolutely fascinating. It's, to me, it's very useful.
And now you live in London with your son and your 11-year-old grandson, and who's sitting right backstage
you
watching.
Have to say 12.
Oh, he's 12. He's 12. And is he a big fan of your acting?
Well, what he's seen, I think he is. He's a big fan of theatre in the round, and which is very interesting to me, that he says he wants to be an actor. I work assiduously to put him off that idea. It's a very, very hard life.
So what are your views, Glenda? And I know you're sort of famously robust about PC and all things sort of liberal bromides, etc. But what are your own views about the Me Too movement and how that has
I was
changed?
in this country when that broke. I was doing another play here, and my overwhelming sense was of the extraordinary hypocrisy. Did we really not know what was going on? I mean, that's just crazy. And although I value very much that there is that kind of opening of a door in a way, it's a very narrow door. I was having this conversation before we came on stage with someone else back there. You know, a woman is being abused, even as we speak, sitting here, probably 30 yards down the road. And that is true around the world. And the fundamental changes are not necessarily on that high economic, famous kind of career level. It is, I think, infinitely lower down. I mean, a classic example for me is the way we have, not a great flood of it, but certainly in England we've had cases of what are deemed to be honour killings, where girls are murdered by their family members, their fathers, their brothers, upon occasions their mothers, because they refuse to marry the man the parents have selected for them. And there are other variations on this, you know, girls not being allowed to go to school, although there are changes being made there. But we kid ourselves if we think that this kind of behaviour is reserved only for a certain group of men and women, because there have been cases of abuse against men. It's part of human nature, and we have to look at it much more closely, and I think in a much more detailed way than we're doing.
Mm-hmm. But it has powered a new look at feminist energy. I mean, let's face it, it has...
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'm really not sure about that, because there seems to be the kind of, the first fine flood, and then there's a kind of leaping on the bandwagon, and then there's a kind of dividing up into who's, you know, really serious and people who are not serious, and it gets lost in its argument instead of looking at what are the causes for why we're arguing in the first place.
Have you ever yourself, were you ever yourself, when you were a younger actress, have to deal with harassment?
Oh, no, I was fat and spotty, come on.
Never had that issue. Well, I want to end, of course, with the great Lear, because there's so much to ponder when you come out of the play. I mean, you just you go right to your I did anyway, right back and dive back into the play. Which passage really speaks most powerfully to you in the play?
The most powerful passage for me is when he's mad, I mean, in the storm, and he refers to poor naked wretches. And, you know, we all walk down a road and see someone homeless, don't we, sleeping in the doorway. At one point in London, there wasn't a shop in London which wasn't the bathroom, bedroom, living room of some poor homeless person. And he says, I have taken too little care of this. And that for me is not simply the responsibility of a king, but in a way the responsibility of us all as individual human beings. We are finding it much too easy to forget that we're all exactly the same.
Yeah, which is so much what Lear is about. Glenda, last question. What do you want to play next? Where are you bringing your fire of performance? Are we going to see the complete canons? I mean, I loved the woman Julius Caesar recently.
To be offered, but I mean, every time I've finished a job, and it will be the same with this, I think, well, I'm never going to be offered another one again. So,
it's been there for quite a long time. Well, one of my favourite lines from Lear is, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. And Glenda, you've always done that in your career. And I'm really grateful to you for coming out of the howling storm of the court theatre and joining us on the stage. And I do really urge all of you to go and see Glenda. It is a virtuoso performance as King Lear.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.